Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's version of HQ Digitize LinkedIn Live. Today, we're doing a discussion about how to be a champion SDR with today's digital buyers. And we have a special guest with us today, and I'll let Danny introduce himself here in a bit. Danny Goff. Who I wanted to bring on with respect to this topic, and we'll talk more about this obviously, because he is in fact a manager and trainer and recruiter, all the above, as well as an SDR, and for other SDRs. So he's going to be able to bring us some perspective on the world as it really is, as opposed to the world that we all think we know when we talk about it. So I think we're all really going to enjoy that, and I'm looking forward to it. But I just wanted to talk a little bit as well, real quick, about Digitize HQ. So this is a place to go where we can all talk about everything digital enablement for the C-suite on down to the front lines, right? So this is where we talk about all things digital as it affects B2B and even retail when that makes sense. So we have the founder of Funnel Amplified and a number of other businesses, Mr. Brandon Lee. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hey, everybody, as Thomas said, I am the founder of Funnel Amplified, and my passion is around using social media to create first conversations with customers. So that's why I'm involved with Digitize HQ.
Nice. Nice. And I am, just in case you didn't know, I am the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer for Funnel Amplified. And Danny, you're up. Give us your...
All right. Thank you, fellas. Good morning. I appreciate you guys having me on here. I appreciate the introduction. Little bit background on me. Have been with Driver Reach now for 4 years. Prior to that, I ran my own art manufacturing business. So print fulfillment for artists all over the country, all over the world. Ran that into the ground and wanted to get into technology, believe it or not. So had some friends that had done very well, had kind of followed that SDR to account executive model. One of my good buddies does very well, enterprise sales. I saw his lifestyle. He was doing remote sales, working about 3 days a week, and making a lot of money and playing golf the other day. So I said, there might be something to this. And so had an opportunity, got connected. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, very involved with the startup community here. Got connected with Driver Reach, started out as their first SDR, sales development rep. Some people call them business development reps. Did that for a couple years. And then about 25,000 phone calls and 40,000 emails later, and I don't even know how many LinkedIn messages. So maybe that's where Funnel Amplified comes in, I think. But here I am, senior account executive. So just to be clear, I'm not currently an SDR leader, but I am an advocate. I love and I respect the SDR position. I think it is so valuable, a lot of times underpaid and misaligned with incentives, but there are a lot of times on that front line. Just working the phones, working email, working digital. I will say every industry is a little bit different. So you may not like some of my answers today to some of these questions with my outbound techniques, but I'm also in an industry that is very slow to adapt to technology. I know there are a lot of those out there, but they are required in transportation by the federal government to keep an up-to-date phone number and email address that's in a database. So the people that I'm selling to are on the phones. So my recommendation would be whoever you're selling to, meet them where they are. And then we can use digital strategy, social strategy to help engage. Yeah, I know, nodding your head, Thomas.
Well, you know, you're starting with the close. I don't even know what's wrong with you. Danny, why don't you tell them how we met?
Yeah, so I was I wouldn't say young. I was about 31 years old. Took my first position in tech as the first SDR for driver reach. And the big buzzword of, would have been 2018, was this social selling. And so I started to do some research, just like every prospective buyer does today online and through social, and then got connected with Thomas, did a good training, really valuable training. At the time, I was primarily focusing on LinkedIn social strategy, had approximately 2,000 connections on LinkedIn, hadn't really utilized it, did about 6 months of training, and here I am today with over 14,000 connections that really help amplify my messaging, my brand, and it's been quite the ride. So very appreciative of everything that you taught me, Thomas. And looks like we've got a tool that I've seen a big gap in the market where we don't have to track all that in spreadsheets anymore.
So let's talk a little bit about SDRs, because that's really what this is all about today. And what we really want to do is to help two sides of the equation, if I can put that language around it. So the first side is obviously the SDR themselves, those that are currently doing it, those who want to do it, those maybe transitioning into that kind of role. And secondly is those that employ, recruit, hire, and train SDRs. So we want to speak to both groups with some perspective here. And that's why your viewpoint is so critical, Danny, as well as Brandon. So I'm going to put this question out. And my question is, and you can maybe kick it off, Danny, because you're around. What is an SDR, number one? And not just by reading it out, but by definition, what they do, and what are generally their main objectives?
Yeah, SDR, sales development rep, again, typically on the front lines, typically doing outbound work. There are different, inbound versus outbound, and different companies have different positions and roles for them. But they are the ones that are typically qualifying and scheduling meetings. In the software world, the model is SDR sets the meeting, they're pounding the phones, email, using digital strategies, different cadences, and they are supposed to be teeing up the account executive, who then comes in at some point, does a thorough discovery, does a demo to the pain points that they've identified during that discovery, and then closing that opportunity. So front lines, booking opportunities, working to tee up that account executive, depending upon how the process works within each organization.
Right. Brandon, would you say that that's more or less what you've seen by way of the customers and clients that you support and work with now? Brandon, your mic might be off.
I did that so I wouldn't interrupt earlier, and there you go. I think don't have to put like $1 in the mute jar or something like that because of it. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that and I'm opinionated on this, but yeah, I mean that's the role. I won't disagree with that. Now, whether I like it or not is another story, but yeah, that's definitely the role. Their job is to go out, meet people, develop conversations, and set up demos.
Would you say that the way that they do that job has or is changing over the last number of years? Brandon, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's going to change a lot from call it March of 2020 with the pandemic. Definitely put a change in it, but I think it was changing before that because the data has been changing. I think a lot of either SDR leaders or sales leaders overall have ignored a lot of the data. I think I see what a lot of these very well capitalized companies have done. Their growth model has been just put more butts in seats and make more phone calls and send more emails, not because it's the most efficient or the best sales process, but it was really the only process a lot of them had. And when you can throw money at it, you put butts in seats. The challenges I see with the SDR model is high turnover, lack of success, burnout. And so from a cost perspective for companies, I don't think it's a great model, but I don't think a lot of companies got the point of seeing the alternatives.
Yeah, I love that. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think everything starts with a solid foundation. You and I were talking about this the other day, Thomas. A lot like my example with my career. Day one, spent half a day with an SDR trainer, very skilled at what she did, knew nothing about our industry, was given a script, and then the second half of the day was hitting the phones. And it was like, here you go, figure it out, sink or swim. Booked my first meeting that day, went on a run of about a year and a half straight of booking at least one new opportunity per day. So a lot of that, though, was I was in a position in my life where I had to figure this out. I had a newborn on the way, was about to be a father. And my goal at that time, I wanted to get to that account executive position. Because that's where a lot of times that's where the money's made. There are companies that do incentivize their SDRs and pay their SDRs well, but that's everyone's still using. I don't know if it was 2009, 2010 that HubSpot playbook. So they've got that marketing funnel, driving demand through ebooks, through content, then becomes a marketing qualified lead. Then at that point, that's typically kind of mid-funnel. The SDR will begin their outreach. Sometimes, depending on product market fit and where you're at and the stage of your business, that SDR is actually creating the demand as well, or at least the awareness, maybe not demand. So they're somewhat of a marketer on the front lines too. But it is changing. You have to get creative. And I'll say this again, you have to find ways to meet your prospective clients where they are.
Well said.
You're looking at email of an open rate of maybe 20%.
Well, and those, and I mean, this is the thing that I've been saying, and I'd love for somebody from MailChimp or Constant Contact or somebody to come tell me I'm wrong, is open rates. There's a lot of technology on the back end that calls an email open, even though human eyeballs may not have actually looked at it, or they've opened it long enough to delete it and it still gets categorized. The number, and I think a lot of marketers like to focus on open rates because it's a better number, but the best number is click rates and conversation rates that have come from those emails, and we just don't talk about those enough, and it's because they're not great numbers to be sharing.
100%. Yeah. What good's an open if it doesn't create a conversation?
Right.
Yeah, very well said. Brandon, with that in mind, what can companies do now to improve what you just described in terms of how the SDRs can get better impact?
Well, and I mean, Danny's saying all the right stuff, in my opinion. You've got to go where your buyer is. You've got to go meet them where they are. And whatever, if you're using that HubSpot model and it's inbound, top of the funnel, they read a few pages, they download a PDF, whatever, it gets handed off to an SDR. Whatever that front process is, to me, doesn't matter as much. Danny is spot on. We've got to start looking at how do we meet them where they are. And that's where I think the biggest change is taking place that is the most ignored right now. Right? Buyers are not, and there are some successes. There are some successes with pounding the emails and pounding the phones. But is it the most efficient use of a person's time? If you're going to put another butt in a seat and pay a salary and train them to do something, just because we've done that for the past 10, 12 years, 15 years, 50 years, doesn't mean right now it's the best use of time. And I think we're at a very pivotal stage where over the last 10 years, buyers have changed a lot. And buyers have changed a lot because they do not need salespeople for information. Now, I got the gray in my beard. Danny doesn't. So obviously I'm a little bit older.
That's
but,
why you have one.
Yeah. I got a little bit.
Yeah, I got a little bit more. But when I started in sales in the 90s, the cold door knock and the cold call,
Yeah.
the advantage that we had back then was they didn't have Google. They didn't have LinkedIn. They didn't have, the internet. They didn't have landing pages. They needed us for information. And we were the fastest source of information. They could wait for the journals to come out, or they could wait for the industry newsletter things and all that. But overall, they needed us for information. And so they were willing to let us have a seat at their table, take them to lunch, do whatever, because they used salespeople for information. Rightfully so. And we thought, oh man, we're killing it. But that's why back then, the emphasis was on, could you close a deal, not on could you generate a conversation. And as buyers have changed, in my opinion, and technologies have changed, buyers have just as much technology as we do. They can unsubscribe, they can block us, they can be connected to us on social media but ignore us. They can do everything they can to keep people out of their circle. We have to earn the right to be invited into their circle.
Right on.
Yeah, that's where I think, again, it comes down to a foundation with your training, foundation with your tech stack, data integrity, data governance, data enrichment. If you don't have that, then you're going to struggle. So building the right foundation from the very beginning. Ideally, all your systems talk to each other. You have the right information in those systems, but there is no perfect system.
Right.
So, like specifically your CRM. Okay, we saw a question here. Your CRM, it's just really important. Like the advantage of a CRM is to get time back in your day and to work more efficiently. But if you have a poor foundation and your workflows aren't set up properly and you're not aligned with marketing and you're not serving up those leads to your team, then you need to reevaluate kind of that data governance or that foundation.
Yeah. So Dan asked this question, and Danny, you might be the most qualified person to ask it. So is a phone more effective than email in getting a qualified lead interested or a meeting booked? And I know, Thomas, you have a very strong opinion on that as well.
Well, you got to break that out first, right? Because, one of the things that we get pushed back on is that people suggest we're saying phones are an unnecessary tool and you never need a phone again. Well, that's silly, right? I mean, these things still do dial, even though many people don't know that, but they actually do dial. And in fact, they do work. So there is value, but the value isn't where it used to be. So with respect to that question, is a phone more effective than an email in qualifying somebody? Whenever you actually talk to somebody, it's a better way to qualify and to develop that opportunity vis-a-vis getting an appointment or whatever step in the sales process you might be. That said, to get that phone call took probably another activity before you got there, because if you dialed 100 times to get that person who isn't answering an unknown number, I'm impressed, but not so much, because you probably wasted 2 weeks in doing it, right? When what you could have done is begun that process with a sales cadence that includes digital activity and allows you to create that opportunity so you can get them on the phone, because now they know you're calling, or now they know you're in a Zoom call, or whatever the scenario is that you've created by way of creating the conversation through engagement, and thereby the relationship going from there. So the answer needs to be set up in a way that makes sense from the perspective of, is it cold calling, or is it calling somebody who's warm, who already knows you? Because if it's cold calling, the answer is no. If it's warm calling, the answer is yes, right? I want to circle back to something earlier, because Brandon said something kind of interesting about when when he started.
Real quick, I'm going to let Dan know first. I'm curious for Dan to comment in on what your response was to that as well. But go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, please do, Dan. I'd appreciate that.
Thomas,
keep going on what
he may not like
what you're
my response here. With my 2,000 plus meetings that I've had in the last 4 years, 99% have been booked over the phone. But every industry is a little bit different. The qualifying piece, you want to be able to trust, depending where you're at in your business, you should be able to trust your data that you have in your CRM, assuming that marketing is aligned, to help warm that conversation up. So if we've had a conversation like you're spot on, Thomas, cold calling is dying, but how can we warm it up? How can we have conversations in other platforms to be able to create engagement and then reference that engagement on that phone call?
And I think that's interesting, Danny. I totally agree with what you just said. I may disagree with how to do it. I don't know. You said if you're coordinated with marketing that's warming up that lead for you. My question is, could the individual do that warm-up process better than expecting buyers to go to your corporate domain? Because we know buyers are hesitant to go to corporate websites. It's just not part of their daily until they absolutely want to. They're not doing it. But the term that I like to use is, how do we make ourselves in a familiar entity as an individual? Can we become familiar to our prospects as a way to speed up the opportunity that they are willing and excited to get onto a call with us? And I know that we can, and that's why I've gotten into more of the social activity, because social activity is the opportunity that we can get in front of them. We can engage where they are. We can pop up in their notifications and they see our name and they see our face. We become part of their social community and we become a familiar entity, so that when you do either make that call or send the email, you're no longer cold, you're warm to, maybe even hot, because they like what you've said inside of social. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's the approach that when I first started working with Thomas, my strategy was more of a content marketing strategy. So I was new to the industry. I thought about, it was actually David Delaney. I don't know if you know that name. Runs Tenbound. Big SDR trainer, advocate. And I had been listening to a webinar of him. I won a free training for a month where we had a phone call once a week. And he recommended that I put myself in my prospect's shoes. So I started calling up prospects, asking them questions, better understanding their business, better understanding what they go through on a daily basis. And then from that point, I think for almost a year straight, weekdays, I made at least one post on LinkedIn. And it wasn't about me. That's where I think a lot of companies miss out or misunderstand how to market at times, from a personal brand standpoint, at least. Putting out content that would be helpful to your industry.
Well, and interesting to the industry. I remember some of your content back then, like showing that trucker, I remember this, who had passed away, and they put his hearse on a flatbed and drove that puppy across the country. And he had a convoy of followers from one end of the country to the other, and you rolled with that. And not only did that support the people that you work with, it supported the industry as well. And your uptake and your build from that was absolutely outrageous. And that's what it's about. But I want to come back to something you said, and because it combines in with what Brandon just said as well. And you said that you have to go where your customer is, right? Now, when you say that, right, the first thing that pops to my mind, and this is, of course, me, not everybody has this problem, but the first thing that pops to my mind is that you need to know your customer's profile. Who is your customer? Where are they? How do you reach them? Right?
Personas.
From that, you can say, okay, so they're generally here. This is where I'm going to reach them, wherever that might be. Now, in your case, with driver reach, and you said it right off the top today, right?
Mm-hmm.
The government regulates and mandates that those phone numbers and emails are published.
Yep.
And furthermore, that those people representing those phone mails and emails are paying attention on the basis of the information coming to them one way or the other. So right away, your specific customer profile gave you an enormous leg up by way of reaching out to those folks. And I don't mean to in any way negate the work you did and the results you got, not at all. But I'm saying that's a better position than somebody who's cold calling, right, or calling out without the ability to be recognized by that individual, right, and or have their email address. And it truly is simply cold outreach in that way. So that's not A versus B. That's a golf ball versus a watermelon, right? So we want to clarify that, and that's why it's really important that we know where. And I love what you said. Where are my customers, right?
Yeah.
And once we determine that, you know, because it's not always going to be on LinkedIn, is it?
Yeah, 100%. And to take it a step further, my strategy and thought process. Okay, so we typically sell to recruiting managers. So who do recruiting managers look for in the transportation industry? Who are they trying to connect with? Drivers. So I put out a lot of my content to be geared towards those drivers. So get the likes, get the engagement, get the connections with these drivers. And then naturally, you know, those drivers are commenting, well, okay, the recruiting manager are looking for those drivers. And then they happen to stumble upon my post, see what I do. So the work that we did, setting up the LinkedIn profile, being clear on your mission, then I might get a couple messages a day from recruiting managers after they do a little research on our business, on me. So it can work in certain industries, certain businesses. Doing marketing for your customers' customers could be a strategy. And it worked very well for me building my network on social.
Right. Right.
And then you've got that engagement. You look up what company they're with. You have the federal database of these phone numbers, and it's just that much easier. Hey, I really appreciate your comment on my post. It looks like y'all are hiring some drivers. Let's schedule a few minutes to chat. I think we might be able to help, or whatever your pitch is, or your some people have scripts, but
well, getting to that leads very nicely into another question, another area here, and that is, to what extent did you have a cadence and a process that you followed, and then repeat as an SDR then, now, and what do you think about the future in that respect?
It's a great question. Tried quite a few cadences over the years, primarily phone and email. Social needs to be in there as well. I think the issue is not set, again, coming back to the CRM foundation and not setting up the reporting, the dashboards to be able to measure and manage what's working. So it's kind of like flavor of the week. We'll try this one week. We might have gotten some results, but we're not really A/B testing like we should be. But there absolutely should be a cadence. Primarily mine has been phone and email, and then I involve social after that initial, depending where the lead came from or the lead was sourced, I'll involve social after that initial connection. So after my initial discovery or demo call, I will then connect with them on LinkedIn.
Right. Well, let me ask you this: of all the people that you know to be both SDRs that you worked with, right, and SDRs in general, how many of them do you think do work with a cadence A, and how many do you think have an effective cadence B?
I'd say maybe 50%
Okay.
work with a cadence.
Okay.
maybe.
Right.
Effective, probably under 20%, just
Wow.
because it's not being managed appropriately.
Well,
They're not doing an analysis frequently on what's working, what's not. It's ever changing, and then the content is a big issue too. With these sequences, so those that aren't familiar with sequences, specifically with email, pre-scheduled drip campaigns that go out. Okay, is this content marketing content? Are we adding value? Is it personalized? Is it relevant? I think that's a big issue. Just there's a lot of times management can be so caught up with certain metrics. How many emails did you send? How many phone calls did you make? That the quality gets lost, and it's more about quantity. But I do believe that you should have those metrics, those standards, expectations set up front, and that does need to be held accountable. So whether that's 20 or 10 emails a day, 20 calls a day, 15 LinkedIn outreaches a day, like there needs to be some sort of standard operating protocol when it comes to those, comes to that outreach.
See, and it's such a hard. I'm sorry, Thomas. Did I interrupt you? Go ahead.
That wasn't an opening for Brandon Lee. I don't know what is.
Well, it's the hard part is this: is that it's you got to put some protocols in place. You've got to get some numbers, some metrics of things that are expectations in place. Why do we do that? Because some people take advantage of it. Get that. The challenge is it then handcuffs other people to a process or a process for Thomas here. It handcuffs them to a process that may not be the most efficient. Here's what I mean by that. I remember this was from the podcast, The Brutal Truth About Sales. And this was probably, I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe even more. But I love the story. He had a guest on there, and she was a younger woman who actually was raised with his daughter, I believe. And she had graduated from college. She was in her first company as an SDR, and she got called into her boss's office. And she's telling the story on the show. And she said she walked in and her boss said, I want to show you this. This is the list. This is the amount of emails that so-and-so sent out. And he sends out the most emails on a regular basis. And she was like, oh, crap. What do I do? And she said, and here's your list. This to this. And she's like nervous. And she goes, oh, well, let me explain. She goes, no, hold on. Her boss says, hold on. Here's your numbers, your close numbers, your sales numbers. And here's his numbers. Yeah. What are you doing differently? And her basic response was she was taking much more of a human approach. She wasn't putting people through a machine to hit her numbers. She was reaching, and she had quality outreach versus quantity outreach. And it was paying dividends because she was leading the business in the closes. And I think that's the challenge that leaders have, is they want to put metrics in place to, kind of the whip behind people to make sure that they're doing the work. But what it causes is people to do the inefficient work.
Mm-hmm. Again, quantity over quality.
Yep. And it's my opinion, and obviously I have a bent, but it's a training issue. There's a better way to do it. It takes a little bit more time on the front end. You can't bring SDRs through like an assembly line and just go sink or swim. That's still, when you look at the numbers, if 50-60% of your SDRs fail,
maybe more than that.
Right. The waste of money and time and effort. But these companies, like I said at the beginning, they're putting butts in seats, and figure the incentive, as you've said, is if you crush it as an SDR, you can become an AE, and that's where you start making money. Mm-hmm. And so they treat SDRs like an assembly line, when I think it's a little bit of a go slow to move fast approach, And I think that's been lost. Like, if you're going to invest 6 to 8 months in an SDR knowing that 50-60% of them fail, right? What if you hired few of them, invested in them in that first 4, 5, 6 months so that they become successful and they don't leave or get fired at the 8-month mark because they're just not making the money that you said they could make?
Yeah, and that SDR role can look different for every company. A lot of times they're the ones that are filling out your CRM, doing the research. So then you've got all of that work combined with the outreach, combined with the expectations of the meetings booked and the show rates. It's just a lot. So if I were to do it, if I had a startup and were to hire SDRs, I'd maybe hire 2 and then either hire internally a researcher or outsource that work so that all the fields, all the data, all the personas, the contact info, everything's accurate in your system. So then when you are doing that outreach, it can be more effective.
So you're not wasting their time doing CRM work. Interesting. Thomas, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a really good idea. Anything you can do to speed up the process so more can be done where it's impactful is going to be important. But I think that at the end of the day, this is just my experience. Everybody's got different experiences, and I've worked with some rather large groups as well, and I don't see a consistent sales cadence, right? Whether it's at the SDR level or whether it's at the account executive level, I don't see that. I see in most cases that there generally is some kind of defined sales process and cadence that they want those teams following, but I don't see that it's, as you pointed out to earlier, Danny, that it's accountable, that there are KPIs and goals against it, and that people are watching and following. And, accountability is important. I mean, nobody's going to deny that. But when you have a 50% fall off rate, you want to be careful with accountability, I guess. But what's really important is the dials, right? And this is something that people miss. And what I mean by that is that in traditional phoning and emailing, outside of the tagline on your email, maybe, or what that first line was that somebody might read, there's not a whole lot of dialing up or dialing down of what you're either sending an email or you're phoning or you're not, right? It's pretty black and white. With social and digital activities, whether they be on LinkedIn or Facebook, or whether you're putting them in other digital media profiles that can be effective as a company or an individual, you can test. You can do what you said, Danny. You can do A versus B. And you can do all these different dial-ups and dial-downs on different profiles, on different digital and social media channels. And not only that, but I don't have to wait 2 weeks to see what my results were. I can see my results in real time, right? Now, when I take that and I build it against the cadences that we've developed for my team of 2 or 10 or 500, because it doesn't really matter. Now I've got data, and this is less for me about accountability and more for me about help making these people productive. So now I'm dialing and I'm setting up the system in order for them to get the best impact they can be getting. And now I can align those cadences and the steps we want them to take. Is it reaching out on LinkedIn? Is it reaching out on Facebook Messenger? Is it sending them to our group page? Is it sending them to some of the CTAs on our website? What are the different things that we can be doing in that cadence sequence that are going to make the whole thing run, right? And it's like Indianapolis 500, man. I mean, the guy who fixes that engine, they all have the same darn engines for the most part, but it's the ones who can tune those engines the best and get that 1/10 of a second faster that win the race. Well, this is very similar. You've got to tune the engine. You don't just throw it out there and hope there's enough gas, because as the 50% attrition rate shows you, there probably isn't. So that's my take.
Yeah, I love the Indy 500. I think we're only 93 days away, but who's counting?
Is that what it is?
It's a big deal here.
I was say, spoken from a true Indianapolis boy, right?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. I think it's, for me, a lot of this conversation, it starts at leadership level because for whatever reason over the last 10 years as I take that 30 or 40,000 foot view as venture capital got more companies were taking in venture capital. There was high pressure to grow fast and they didn't know what else to do. And they had the money. So they put a bunch of butts in seats and said, hit the phones. And then technology came out of that because they were hitting the phone. So how do we make more phone calls? How do we make sure that people are being efficient with their time? Okay, let's send out the email cadences too, so we can alternate phone calls and emails. But they were all geared around being efficient for the company to grow. But the biggest variable that they forgot about, in my opinion, is that the buyer's a real freaking human being.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't been treating buyers like a human being. Business has always been around that networking side. And I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, relationship doesn't matter anymore. Bullshit. Because the purchase is very personal to the buyer. They still have to know, like, and trust, to whatever extent that is, the person that they're working with. And you can lose that a lot faster when you're drilling for a demo, which is what you're really empowering SDRs to do. You got to get that demo every day, at least one demo, at least one demo, at least one demo. Now, I have an experience that really, really turned me off. And I think it was in like 2012, 2013. I was getting messages from marketing from Infusionsoft. Screw it. Forget protecting the guilty. It was from Infusionsoft. I'd used Infusionsoft before. I quit. And I was getting these messages in an email cadence about coming back. And they had this special offer. And there was going to be some special training that you could go into and all that. And after, I'm like, I'm kind of curious. I hadn't quite bought into HubSpot. And so I said, curious, filled out the form. And then I get a phone call from somebody. And they had absolutely no idea what I responded to. They went into sales mode and I'm like, okay, well, hold on. What about this? They're like, oh, we don't do that. I'm like, well, you better get your facts straight because that's what I responded to. So again, marketing put a campaign in place. The SDR had absolutely no idea what it was. And they just came at me from their script. Right?
So poor training.
Yeah.
Poor data visibility. Probably had no idea where the lead came from.
There was a lot of flaws in that. But the biggest flaw, in my opinion, as the buyer, was the SDR had no idea and had no real concern about who I was, what I needed, what I wanted, anything, that they just push to get me to agree to a demo so they could throw me up to an AE and check the box that they secured a demo for the day or whatever, maybe it was 2 per day at the time. I don't know, but their focus was just to get me to agree to a demo and they didn't care about anything else. What it told me is they were trained, equipped, and motivated just to get me to agree to a demo, to a point that they didn't give a crap about anything else about me.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest challenges I see with SDRs. And I know, leaders will go, oh, well, we don't do that. Well, bullshit. You may think you don't, but by the time the processes get in place, what's heard by the SDRs is this is what I need to do. Or maybe I'm wrong.
What do you think, Dan?
No, I think you're spot on. Poor alignment from the very beginning. The incentive is the meeting for that SDR role. I like to simplify things. How many quality conversations can we have a day?
Right.
How can we track? And ideally, we can track that somehow and have
sure.
a dashboard. Could be through email, could be through the phone, through social. But have I had 5 to 10 quality conversations today? And then
Yep.
SDRs also, I think you got to think long term. So not just about that meeting right now, today, got to get that on the calendar. Provide some value every single time you reach out, every touch point, whatever channel that's on, and be helpful. And if you don't get it today, as long as you're adding value, then that might become an opportunity down the road.
Can I ask you a question on that? I'm sorry, Danny, go ahead and finish.
I was just saying, don't be too short-sighted.
Yeah. So I have a question on that, and this really isn't as skeptical as it may sound, but maybe it is. I don't know. I hear that conversation a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Add value, just keep adding value, keep adding
Mm-hmm.
value, give. Vaynerchuk's old thing, jab, 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 right hook.
Yeah.
It's, is in Dave Luark, one of our customers, that says deposit, 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 deposit before you take a debit. Love the theory.
Mm-hmm.
I see that very weakly supported inside companies. They talk about it, they give it lip service. But at the end of the day, when they're asking about activity, they're like, how many demos did you book?
Mm-hmm.
And what they forget, and this I go back to, I always remember this story. I learned so much in this short period of time. Back when I owned By Design Publishing, we had a call center. This is back in like 2003, when I think call centers were actually effective. We had a call center in the business for sales. Then we had the call center for customer success. And my VP of operations came to me one day and she said, hey, I've got a problem with your behavior. It's like, okay, what did I do? And, she was totally empowered to be I told her she was tell me about my blind spots. And she said, Brandon, you tell the customer success team that their job is more important than sales, because retaining and renewals were important to our success. She said, but your behavior every day, you go out of your office and you walk to the sales room 5 or 6 times a day and check the sales numbers. You walk to the customer success department maybe once or twice a week. Mm-hmm. She said, what do you think your physical behavior tells them versus what you say to them? And it was this big aha moment for me, is that no matter how much I told customer success, how important their job was and everything, my physical behavior of walking to the sales room 5, 6 times a day and looking at the board and seeing where our revenues were spoke a totally different story to them. I had to change my physical behavior in order to change the whole culture in my company. And I think that's where we get in these mistakes, is that this 30-day pressure, the quarterly pressure, sales leaders go back to, how many meetings did you book? And all of a sudden that whole give them value, because they may not close today, but maybe they'll close next week, gets thrown out the door, because now it's like, I got to get that one today. I got to get it in today. I got to get it in today. And we stop treating buyers like they're human beings and on their own journey, and we try to force them to fit into our personal sales timelines. What do you guys think about that?
Danny?
I think that's the way most organizations run today. And those are the metrics that they seek, is that number of meetings, and some of those other items, when you are adding value, get lost and that data is not visible. I don't know what the answer is necessarily, but I would agree that is a big issue.
Yeah. The answer is that change has to come at the top, and it's really, really hard to come at the top. And I think it's partly because a lot of sales leaders have spent their last 25 or 30 years doing the same process. And what's happening is that they're living right in the middle of a big era of change, and they're not seeing the change that's right in front of them. I think a lot of these sales leaders are like, frogs in a pot that's on heat. They don't realize they're boiling, but they're going to look up one day and they're going to be boiled.
I think those are all really good points, and that's really valuable information, especially given the changes that are happening and what people have to do. But we have a question here, and it's an interesting one, so I want to address it, and then you guys can jump in and tell me what you think. My answer to this is going to be different than yours, I'm guessing, Danny. But maybe we can even duke it out a little bit on this one. So my answer to this would be that your first step should not be to try and connect with somebody personally on a cold call. Your first step should be to find them, research them, do a little bit of digging on them, and connect with them on social media, thereby starting an engagement process where you can build a relationship. That should be your first steps. Now, once you've done that and you've learned a little bit about Mary or John or Paul or Steve, now you've earned the right to engage, share their content, have them in your content. Now you can reach out and say, hey, John, it's been great going back and forward. I'd really love to talk to you first and have a virtual coffee. Do you have time tomorrow? And John says, yeah, that would be great. Now you can get that warm call, have a great call, learn about them, maybe even get into what their pain points might be based upon what you do and what you've been reading in your content and vice versa. But also you've gotten to know him or her. And so you can bring more and have a real human conversation rather than a cold call where you've got to quickly find something that's important.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can guess at the right thing, assuming you got them on the phone in the first place. So that would be my answer, but I leave it to you two now to add to that.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on finding ways to warm it up. Our methods are a little different, and again, but depends on industry, business model, all that. But anything that I can possibly do to warm up that conversation. So I would recommend, if you're an SDR, start from the top down. Go for that CEO, go for that VP, or that head of the department, and then work your way down. And then you can reference that conversation, because I don't know about you. Well, I guess you don't have bosses, but if my boss told me to do something, I'm most likely going to do that. So if so-and-so recommended that I connect with, someone else, then I'm going to reference that on that call. Or if that's where this data integrity, having this accessible in your CRM, so you can see that. You can see and tie in relevancy from past meetings, from past opportunities, from past conversations. So something to make that conversation more warm than just a pure cold outreach. So, hey, we'd met with you in 2019. I know the timing wasn't right. Wanted to see if you'd be open to scheduling a few minutes to chat. And a lot of times that same person that was there in 2019 is not going to be there a couple of years later, especially in transportation. So little things like that, doing a little bit of research in advance before your outreach. So mine's a little bit different. It depends where that lead's coming from, where that lead's sourced. I think we would all like to have 100 inbound demos a day.
This question could become an entire 1 hour conversation. You can see there's so many things that frustrate me about this, not from Michael's perspective at all. But this is why I say generating a conversation has become the new closing.
Right.
The skill with salespeople is needed in the beginning now. As I said earlier today, cold knocking, cold calling 15, 20 years ago was easy. A lot of people wanted to talk to you because you were a source of information. And now that they don't need you as a source of information, getting that conversation is so much harder. And as Michael says here, is trying to personally connect with them. But I believe if you ask a buyer right now, things like we did years ago, so what keeps you up at night? look, if you don't know my problems, why am I talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I've got to explain to you what my problems are, you haven't done your research.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to explain those things to you, then why are we doing it yet? Because I don't need you unless you're helping me. I don't need you to take my time for me to tell you what's going on with me. And I think that's the way buyers think. They're too busy to do that. And Danny, I agree with you. If we can reference something you said like looking in the data to a previous conversation. But and as you said, hey, in 2019 we had this conversation, but that's probably not the same person. I think all that is spot on. What we need to do is create those conversations ahead of time for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where social comes in. Sales has got to be much more, especially in this digital world, and especially with buyers so busy, and buyers have the ability to protect their own time and keep you out of what I call their circle of trust. We've got to create the opportunity to get welcomed into their circle of trust. And that's where social plays in. We can go engage with them. We can become that known entity, as I like to say, by commenting on their post or commenting and engaging on posts that they comment and engage with. Get into their digital community before we ask for that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Treat your prospecting as a networking event, not a sales event. Right? Just visually, if you think of you're in the networking room with a cocktail in your hand, they have a cocktail in their hand. What is that conversation like
Mm-hmm.
versus a conversation you have when you're sitting across the table in their boardroom from them? Because generating the conversation is more like a networking event. Danny and I are at a networking event. You have a cocktail in your hand, and I walk up to you and I hand you my brochure and I tell you how awesome we are and ask if you got 30 minutes for a demo. You're going to call security or punch me in the nose because it's completely inappropriate behavior. But yet, that's what we end up training and requiring SDRs to do 8 hours a day, and then ask them at the end of the day, how many meetings did you book?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, Michael's question, don't know anything about his organization or his training, but he might be tasked with pretty much hitting the phones all day. So if that's what management's telling him to do, find any way that you can possibly provide relevance and warm up that call so it is not purely cold outreach. Be respectful. We're interrupting their day. I think it was a study by Gong a couple years back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really pitch at all on the phone. I don't pitch until I might give them a little teaser of what we do, but I don't pitch until we've done a thorough discovery. Then I'm solutioning to their problems. So for Michael, start top down, warm it up somehow through mutual connections, through relevancy that you've done the research, through social. And then I go straight for the kill. I show that I'm interrupting their day. I am respectful. And then I don't know if you'd be open to, I'd like a few minutes to chat, show you what we do that might be able to help you grow your company or whatever that pitch might be from there.
No, I agree with you, and I agree with you with one caveat, Danny. I think we have to create that relevancy. We have to create that the desire in them to want to speak to us, and that's where social comes in. And we can't do that with a cold call. And it's harder to do it with a cold email with the amount of emails coming in, but we can do that in social. And that's where our data shows is the big difference of where social comes in. And that's why I like to talk more about social prospecting versus social selling.
Absolutely.
That's a really good point. Well, what an incredible conversation. And what I love is being able to get that feedback directly from you, Danny. I see we've got another question here, taking the top-down approach. I don't know if you want to put that up real quick, Brandon.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That conversation would be different for a C-level executive.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, can you help me out? Just curious, who handles marketing? It depends on your persona that you're looking to speak to. But absolutely, you're not trying to pitch them you're simply getting permission to speak to someone else in their organization. And then on that next outreach, you reference that conversation that you had with that C-level exec.
Yeah, and with that C-level exec, the fact that you've done some research and that you know a little bit about them and the company and all the rest of it, that isn't a nice thing to do. That's the only way you're going to have impact, right? You've got to show that you know who you're talking to, what you're talking about, and where they're coming from or where they might be coming from in lieu of what it is you're going to ask. Because if you haven't done that, they're not listening.
Yeah.
And by the way, that series of points is just as relevant if you're lucky to get them on the phone as it is when you're talking to them on social or any other conversation you're having. So the world isn't about should we be cold calling or should we be doing this. The world is about what's effective. What's the best and most productive way for you to spend your time? And social and digital prospecting takes the place of that in many cases today, but you still end up building the relationship here or on a Zoom call or eventually in person. Those things don't go away. It's how we engage and start, as Brandon always says, the conversations, because that's what it's about.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Did we run out of time, gentlemen?
I think we may have here.
Yeah, hit it. That's good though. So Dan and Michael and Ben, thank you for the comments, at least the ones that we can see. I know we don't, with StreamYard that we use, we don't get all the ones from some of the platforms out there, but I thought today was good. What'd you guys think?
Oh, I thought it was fabulous. And Danny, I so much appreciate your taking the time, because
Thanks,
getting your perspective really made it valuable.
Appreciate the opportunity. I love what you guys are building too. Excited to see that grow.
Thank you.
It's been good. Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining us at Digitize HQ. If you want to join anytime and be part of the conversation, please do. If you want to invite other people to be part of the community, we have the LinkedIn group, we have the Facebook group. And Thomas, I don't know about you, but I've seen the Facebook group is so much more active than the LinkedIn group. It's really kind of interesting. Yeah. And I find that even people that I know on LinkedIn, I end up engaging with them more inside of Facebook. It's pretty funny with Digitize HQ. But so, all right, everybody, well, have a great Friday and we'll see you next week.
Have a great weekend.